great to see so many people here to listen to me talk about Office 365 security. I've got lots of material and I'm going to try and cover in this talk. However, it's not too big a room here, so I'd encourage you to put your hand up and ask me questions as we go through the material. Sometimes if you have a question, that typically means there's a bunch of other people that are trying to ask the same question. So I encourage you to do that. I do have some prizes for questions for people who stay till the end and ask questions. So you got to think about whether you want to ask your question right away or whether you want to wait and try for one of the prizes that we'll be giving away. If you've been to any of the Office sessions before, I'm sure you're familiar with this deal. So my name is Paul Andrew, and I work on the Office 365 team at Microsoft, and I focus on areas of identity, security, and commerce. I'm a technical product manager, which means I get to work with the engineering teams as well as working with customers such as yourselves. It's a fun role, and it gives me a great opportunity to get feedback from people and get that right back into our development teams. So this morning, I've got 3 areas that I'm going to talk about Office 365 security. And before I do that, security is typically an area that people do have lots of questions right off the bat. And I want to just set the scene a little bit and maybe answer some of those questions that I hear immediately when people first start into it. So to think about security and cloud security specifically, there are some key trends that we look at as Microsoft in how we implement our cloud-based software. The first one is the consumerization of IT. Now, the consumerization of IT generally to most people just means bring your own device. Consumerization means people are bringing consumer-oriented devices and wanting to use them in the workplace. People have lots of these devices. Sometimes they prefer them to their work devices, and they're just going to use them. And so how IT managers and chief security officers deal with these consumer devices and integrate them into their organization is certainly a key trend. But actually, it's more pervasive than just the devices that are coming in. We have some survey data from IDC indicating that if you survey employees who are bringing in these personal devices, number is 67% of those employees will say, hey, it's okay to use Facebook at work. Now, if you do the same survey on IT managers or the people who actually set the policy for those organizations, the number is under 50. It's like 47%. So clearly, a lot of organizations actually have policy that says people should not be using Facebook at work, but lots of employees have a different perception. Now, I'm not concerned whether you use Facebook at work or not. What I'm concerned about is there's a gap here. And this gap in the understanding of employees and the understanding of IT and IT management means that there's going to be a gap in other things as well about how you use your software and the kinds of protection that IT have to put into place. And as we think about an environment where more and more people are taking recommendations across social media and how our companies are represented on social media, it becomes critical to understand these kind of things. So that's number one. The second one is targeted attacks. So a targeted attack is something that's different from the viruses of old. The viruses of old, when I use that term, what I'm talking about is a virus that you come in the morning and you're working away on your computers and suddenly your computer's busted and it's got some weird thing on the screen and all your colleagues' computers are exactly the same. If you remember the marijuana virus or the I love you virus, and we had these big days of, well, everything's stopped, no one can work, all the PCs are down. It's a virus that's infected your whole organization. Somebody out there has been having some fun, and they've sent this thing around, and they're going, woohoo, that's great. But generally, these things are cleaned up within the day, within most professional IT organizations. Sometimes they used to taper on, and organizations that are less resourced, but generally they're cleaned up within the day. You come back in the next day, everything's going again, and everything's working. We don't really see those viruses anymore. In fact, we really haven't seen those kind of viruses for 5, maybe 10, a long time. We haven't seen them for a number of years. The kind of attacks that we're seeing now are much more sophisticated and something that we refer to as an advanced persistent threat. Advanced because it is not just somebody in their basement hacking away at some virus and thinking, ooh, what shall I do with this? We're talking about organized groups of people with sponsorship, from some organization that has some agenda. So very advanced. Persistent in that, due to the nature of the sponsorship and the underlying goals of these organizations, they are going to hang around for a while. They're not just looking for a one-day pow, bam. They're looking for some data. They're looking for some data that they can monetize or that they can use in some way. So it's okay to write the kind of virus which nobody notices, nobody sees. There's no cred going up there. No one, brags to their friends about it. But at some point, when you have this virus on your machine and you expose some data on your machine, it's going to capture it, it's going to send it away, and you're done. And you may not know if the information is not useful. You may never know. It may never be shared. But in terms of a persistent threat, there's an issue with that for security, and we really have to be concerned about these new kinds of threats that we're seeing. So another term we use is low and slow. Low and slow, referring to the nature of these things getting in through some chink in the security armor and then waiting for the right information to be there to be sent away. So, identity-centric environment. The change that identity and cloud identity brings is one in which things get more complicated. With identity and the lack of cloud, if you're just thinking about identity within an organization inside of IT, identity is very simple. You've got your Active Directory domain controllers, you've got all your PCs domain connected, and everyone can log in, they have a single identity. Any app that's running on the network anywhere knows who the person is, knows they're logged in, all this kind of stuff. With a cloud identity, you're much more likely to have a different identity on every other SaaS application that you use. So your users are going to have different passwords, or alternatively, you're going to have to implement single sign-on and federate identity providers. It's a much more complicated environment, and there's a lot more to think about. And security it has to be thought of in a different way because of that. Cloud computing, with things moving to the cloud, we're talking about data centers that are not inside of your building anymore. We're talking about data centers that you may not even know where they are, depending on your cloud provider. You may not even know what country they're in. Not Microsoft, we'll tell you. But the data center is something which is typically as accessible to your employees as it is to everyone else. So the possibility of someone trying to brute force attack passwords is going to be higher because it's not just people who are inside of your building. Potentially it's people from anywhere that are going to do that. Regulatory and compliance issues. Regulatory and compliance issues across all countries across the world have increased in the interest that governments have over data sovereignty, data protection, and these things. I have a list here from governments in Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Germany, India, Poland, US, UK. All of these countries, their governments have launched initiatives to determine what is the best way to secure, to police, to think about cloud data security. And so what does this mean? This generally means that these governments are doing good things and making sure that providers of SaaS solutions are doing the right thing and looking after customers. However, it also means there's more paperwork. We all have to abide by these compliance issues and these laws, and so there's more to do to think about, well, does this provider comply with these 5 or 8 different regulations that I'm required to make sure that my cloud providers adhere to because of the country that I work with and partners that I have in other countries, etc. So there's some key trends there that impact cloud security and security in terms of how we move to SaaS applications. So with that as background, who remembers this screenshot? Anyone? Oh, there's a few of you out there. So this is a screenshot from a Microsoft cloud service from many, many years ago. Hotmail was originally, even before this, Hotmail had this weird logo, which was basically HTML with some vowels added into it. Hotmail's been around for a long time. Microsoft has been in the cloud software business for a long time. If you go back to first data center back here, but really MSN and Hotmail was our initial foray into cloud services. Microsoft added this thing called the Microsoft Security Response Center. which is the organization in Microsoft that reacts to any potential threat that is identified against Microsoft software. These guys have huge amount of power across Microsoft organizations, and we'll talk a bit about that in detail as I get along. We got Windows Update there, we got Xbox Live. Xbox Live is a huge cloud service. Now, why this is useful to know is because all of the learnings from building these cloud services can be brought to bear against our commercial offerings that we have for people to make use of. So all of the operational excellence that we get from these things, the security, the way that we think about cloud security and how we make sure that servers stay up, even if there is some kind of exploit going on or a denial of service attack, all of this is learned and brought back into other cloud services we have. Microsoft has this group called Global Foundation Services, and this is the group that owns and manages all of the data centers that we have worldwide. They own the servers and they provide the network and routing equipment that goes in those servers. So our product groups, what they do is they request data centers and then they build out the software, the server software on top of that. And that team's been running for over 10 years as well, Global Foundation Services. Our Trustworthy Computing Initiative, if any of you remember back in about 2000, 2001, Microsoft was well known for having insecure software and having lots of exploits. Partly that was to do with lots of people using Microsoft software at the time, lots and lots and lots of people, and it being a popular target for attack. Anyway, Microsoft started this Trustworthy Computing Initiative, which I'll talk about a little bit, which has been pervasive across all of our products, both released products and cloud services. So there's a ton of stuff up there, and the point that I'm trying to make here is Microsoft has a long experience of building cloud services, and if you're thinking about, hey, should I create a cloud service and maybe put up some servers in the cloud and put them on an infrastructure as a service system, or should I pay extra to Microsoft and pay Microsoft to host those servers? Consider this background that the company has and the experience gained through all this experience. Now, the third background topic that I want to talk about is the recent leaks from the NSA contractor Edward Snowden and how Microsoft views customer data privacy. So people ask about this all the time, so I wanted to talk about it, cover it off a little bit. Microsoft has been responding to these leaks on a particular blog that Brad Smith, Microsoft's general counsel, and he's like an executive vice president. This blog is the Microsoft on the Issues blog, and I just wanted to share a couple of points that are from this blog post that they have made there. And we work really hard to make sure that if governments do have laws that enable them to request customer data, that we make sure that those governments follow the laws that they have set, as well as Microsoft following those laws. So Microsoft is required to follow laws in each country that it operates, and there are laws in the United States where for either national security reasons or for law enforcement reasons, the officials can have subpoenas and request data for individual customers. Microsoft doesn't provide any direct and unfettered access to customer data. There is no secret backdoor into our data centers. If governments want to get customer data, they need to follow this process, and Microsoft has compliance teams that make sure that those rules are followed. So specifically for Office 365, we released in this blog post that we have never provided any government with customer data from any of our business customers for national security purposes. That's US national security. However, law enforcement requests are much more common, and we report on this each year. In 2012 calendar year, there were 4 instances where customer data was requested. 3 of those instances, we notified the customer of the demand, and the customer asked Microsoft to provide the data to the government. In the 4th instance, the customer received the demand themselves, and the customer asked Microsoft to provide the data. So that's 4 incidents. We can't, of course, disclose who those customers are. 4 incidents across 2012. I encourage you to go and take a look at those blog posts. There's a number of other major industry players in the cloud service working to increase the transparency in that process. So talking about privacy at Office 365 versus the competitor. So Microsoft does not do advertising to Office 365 customers. We don't send any marketing emails to users of an Office 365 tenant. The users that you create in an Office 365 tenant, they belong to the customer that has created the tenant. Unlike the Microsoft account, where those consumer accounts have a contract, the individual has a contract with Microsoft, we don't have any agreement with those end customers of an Office 365 tenant. We don't have their agreement to send them market emails, and we don't do that. We don't look at customer data. We don't look at it for advertising purposes or any other reason. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We don't mingle our consumer data and our commercial data, and we're also transparent about our data location. All of these things, none of these things are true for Google Apps. Google Apps have a different model of operation. So privacy is something that is very important at Office 365 for Microsoft. All right, so opening discussions aside, I want to talk about three different areas of Office 365 security. The first is built-in security and how Microsoft secures Office 365 and what we do to keep the systems secure. The second is customer controls, things that a customer who has a subscription to a tenant can control security of their data. And the third is looking at verification and compliance and how we comply with regulations across the world and how you can be sure that that is happening. So for the first one, here's the topics that we're going to take a look at. And I mentioned our Global Foundation Services organization. These are the guys who are responsible for securing the actual data centers. We have two perimeters on our data centers for security. The data centers are places that I don't have access to as a Microsoft employee. If you ever come to Redmond, we have visits that customers sometimes come to Redmond for. You are able to get a tour of a Microsoft data center. It's a data center that houses servers that are used by Microsoft internal development teams. It's not a data center that holds customer data, but it does have a similar layout to customer data centers. Customer data center, yeah. So it's really interesting to go and tour around. And you can take a look at the security, fire suppression types of things. We use two-factor authentication, so getting access to data centers requires a card and also biometrics, hand geometry biometrics, I believe they use. And we have extensive video monitoring of those data centers. We seek out areas to put data centers that are unlikely to be hit by major disasters, such as earthquakes and volcanoes and the like. And we have many days of backup power with contracts to add more power. The diesel generators at these data centers look like the inside of a cruise ship. They are enormous big things. We have the option to provide additional backup power is typically through a contract on a separate generator which can be brought in by truck that we have available. So we have, these data centers are enormous big things. So how do we look after customer data in these data centers? Now, data centers are based on Microsoft software, of course, and we use organizational units within Active Directory to separate customer data. Organizational units and Active Directory is technology that's been around for just on 15 years. It's something that is very well relied on. It's been tried and tested. And we don't have issues, of course, with customers being able to see each other's data because of relying on that background. So customer data is logically isolated. Almost entirely, apart from a small number of customers who are on systems called Office 365 Dedicated, all of our customer data is on shared infrastructure. So the servers that your tenants are on are also used by other customers. And we use this logical isolation and a couple of other techniques to make sure that there is no impact between customers. Our networks are secured. We have security separating our internal networks in the data center from the external network. We use multiple connections to the internet over multiple providers. Microsoft also has a dark fiber network running between data centers so that we can have anything that needs to be communicated between the data centers go on that separate network. We have carrier class routers that are inside of these data centers, which I had never seen before going on a tour here, which separate the internal networks from the external networks. So the edge routers have a number of technologies for detecting potential intrusions and other things like that. Data encryption. Data encryption is provided in Office 365 in a number of different ways. On our Exchange servers for Exchange Online, we use BitLocker. If you're familiar with BitLocker, it involves encrypting the entire hard drive, all the files on the hard drive, and having a secret key which is known at boot up time to the operating system. But if the hard drive is taken out, the hard drive cannot be accessed on any other machine. It gives you the ability to know that if a hard drive is lost or stolen from the physical environment, then the data on that cannot be replayed. We actually destroy hard drives before they are removed from service. Hard drives are aged out, or if they fail, they're destructed on site before they are disposed of. But nevertheless, we also use BitLocker on our Exchange servers. We recommend information rights management for SharePoint. SharePoint servers do not use BitLocker, but information rights management, which I'll talk about it in a minute as well, is what we recommend there. And we use transport layer security, otherwise known as SSL, for connectivity between servers and between the clients that you use and Office 365. Quick word on third-party encryption gateways. These become popular as people want to add additional security and get additional confidence to their network security. These are, unfortunately, none of these are currently supported by Microsoft. And there are a couple of issues that I've listed on the slide that may happen if you have these in between. And the biggest issue for Microsoft is we don't test our service with third-party gateways in the mix. So if we do find an issue with them, it's something that has come up that is because of a change in the environment related to a third-party encryption gateway. There's no way that we could have known that, so we choose not to support customers who use these devices. We use automated operations. Automated operations is a term thinking about how we do administration of servers in Office 365. Microsoft, of course, has a corporate network that spans across the world, which we all use as employees to access data and collaborate with our colleagues. What this is talking about here is the Microsoft corporate network does not have a direct connection into the Office 365 data center. So it's not possible, for example, for an administrator who's doing something on the Office 365 data center network to open up their email in another window. They don't have access to their collaboration type activities and personal productivity applications when they're inside the data center network. Also, there are two basic levels of access that our administrators can get access to the Office 365 data center network. The first level of access, which requires a minimum level of verification, gives an administrator who works at Microsoft access to the servers, but not access to any servers that may have customer data or may expose them to customer data. So we differentiate access that is not possible to get access to customer data with access that may give administrators access to customer data. For the second one, we use this lockbox process. And if an admin requires access to something, to do something on a server that may give them access to customer data, they're required to go through this process, which starts with them having to have a valid trouble ticket. So they have to have a service request that they're responding to, and they have to be able to identify what that service request is. And once they've got that, they have to have gone through this additional level of scrutiny, which is listed up here, a pretty severe background check on the employees. And we use this not only to reduce the access to customer data, but also to reduce the number of employees who actually can go through this lockbox process and get these privileges. Privileges to access servers that may have customer data are granted on a temporary basis, and depending on the nature of the customer data that is being accessed, may require manager approval before it is granted. Once the temporary access can expire, and if the admin has not finished their work, they have to go back and start again and request again. So that's how we separate. We have a separation of administration. We do one other thing about this automated operations, is that once an administrator has gone through and done this, as a tenant in Office 365, you could actually run a report and see when Microsoft administrators were doing stuff that may have given them access to your customer data. So we really take customer data privacy very seriously. It's not something that random temporary contractors might have access to, or certainly administrators know that their work is logged, that customers can see what's going on, and that it can be traced back to them pretty immediately. All right, so I have a few things to talk about on Microsoft security best practices, and we've been going for half an hour. Okay, so I apologize if I'm starting to talk a little bit faster at this point. I just realized I've actually got quite a lot of material to get through here. So see how I can go with that, and you can give me feedback on how I do with that after the talk, of course. So the security development lifecycle is something that Microsoft implemented as part of the Trustworthy Computing Initiative. And the security development lifecycle, you may think of SDL as a software development lifecycle. Well, all of this is related to the software development lifecycle at Microsoft, but it's all focused on security. We require engineers who work on our products to undergo security training. They have to do that once per year. That training is logged, and it actually blocks release of products if engineers have not done security training. It's a good way of keeping up the base level of understanding of software development security there. So going through the requirements and design phase, there's a number of processes that are called out, which our software design has to go through. One up there I'll call out is threat modeling. Threat modeling is a fairly long process that requires thinking about all the different possible ways that a certain piece of software, whether it be a released software that you download or a service that's in the cloud, how it might be attacked. And thinking about that from a security expert point of view, consulting with the dev team, and then what do we do about that? What response should we take in order to do that? So all of that has to be documented and written down. It's quite an involved process there. Implementation and verification, you can see a number of tools that are listed up there that we use internally to run over software and check for various types of issues that may occur. And then in release management, you can see the incident response plan, which is something that has to be written up as part of release management, but it essentially lays out what to do if there is a security exploit on a particular release of software, whether it be cloud-based or a piece of executable that's sent out. What happens if the Microsoft Security Response Center get a call or hear of an exploit or hear of something that has a security problem that's traced back to the software? And this typically has a description of the software, because there's lots of software out there. It has different things that have been thought about in the threat modeling. It has contact details for senior staff who worked on the software, including home phone numbers that they can be called after hours. And it also has access for the security response team into the source code of that software. So if they don't think the engineering team is doing a quick enough job, they can go and access the source code and make modifications as they see fit directly. All right, so that's our security development lifecycle. Throttling to prevent denial of service attacks. So denial of service attacks, everyone knows what they are. It's when you take 1,000 or 10,000 machines and you do accesses to a particular server or a particular website all at one time, causing that web server to overload and not be able to respond to valid requests for access. Now, so we monitor our servers for denial of service attempts. Exchange Online is leading the way on this, and they baseline the normal traffic and usage so that they can identify when a denial of service attack has happened. And we use a thing called traffic shaping to modify the impact a denial of service attack can have. Traffic shaping is simply saying, hey, if there's particular IP addresses which are causing a load, or groups of IP addresses, or ports where requests are coming in, whatever that may be, DNS, ICMP, we're going to reduce the response time on those particular IP addresses. Now, this is a lot more complicated than it sounds. It's not done at a TCP level, it's done at the service level. So the individual services that receive requests will do this traffic shaping. And it mitigates these 4 different types of overloads that can occur. Not all of these overloads are, of course, malicious. Non-malicious excessive use. If the usage from a particular tenant or to particular servers suddenly increases, then traffic shaping is going to kick in. You're going to see the traffic being reduced in response time if this happens. Buggy clients can quite often cause a perceived denial of service attack. A buggy client would be a client that issues the same request over and over again for no good reason. It's checking its mail 100 times a second, or it's doing login requests over and over again. This sometimes happens with different clients that have issues with them, whether they be Microsoft or non. Admin actions is thinking about your admin, of course, at some point needs to do operations on the servers. Sometimes this involves doing the same operation across 100,000 employees. We encourage admins not to run this in 1,000 different threads or on 100 different machines and all target the service, because that does look exactly like a denial of service attack to the service. So there is some traffic shaping that can happen to PowerShell access to the service, as well as other accesses. And then, of course, actual denial of service attacks. So the team is fairly thorough at making sure that traffic loads do not impact customer usage. How do we prevent breach? We do a ton of things here. There's some examples on the slide. I won't go into detail on all of these. To prevent a security breach of a particular tenant or of Microsoft data center. There's a lot of work goes on there, and I can share more if people want to chat more about this after the talk. How do we mitigate breach? Well, we do a number of things to avoid breaches in the first place. However, the team that works on this has told me that they don't want to encourage people to try and breach Office 365. And so we're not sharing any of the material about how we actually detect and respond to breaches. So moving on to the second part of the talk. All right, I better get moving. So the second part of the talk is Office 365 customer controls. So the first thing I want to talk about is rights management services. Rights management is where you can protect a particular file. A file has to be a file type which is capable of being rights management encrypted. And what this generally means is that the clients that read those files are able to decrypt the file and request from the server whether they're allowed to decrypt the file, request keys, etc. So Word is a great example. Word stores files as compressed XML, and those compressed XML files, those docx files, can be also encrypted optionally using the Office technology, Information Rights Management. Information Rights Management builds on this rights management server product and enables you to encrypt the files for any time that it's being sent to the client. So you can have a file that's on your client PC, it's been downloaded, it's rights management encrypted, and those particular rights are then enforced on that file when Word loads it. And they're not enforced locally, they're actually enforced by the server that has the policies. So if you go into Word and you go and open that file, Word has to take a look at whether you have the permissions to view the file right now, whether it has been able to get the key from the rights management server to be able to decrypt the file. If it can, then it just will show it to you. If it doesn't have the key yet, it's got to make a call to the server. So if you've downloaded a file or someone's given you a file and Word has not gone to get that key and you happen to be offline, you can't look at the file. You've got to go online, go and get the key, and then Word can decrypt it. If, alternatively, your rights have expired, and the key is no longer valid and it cannot decrypt the file, and you're offline, you won't be able to decrypt the file. So Word has to have a valid key that it can view this file. So what does this mean? This means you can get a rights managed encrypted or information rights management file, which is a Word document, a PowerPoint, any other kind of document which is supported by IRM, and you can send it to anyone. You can put it on a USB key, you can put it on a public website, and you know that only the people in the organization or that you have given permission to view this file will be able to decrypt it and access it. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick here. So we've had information rights management in our Office and in Office 365 for a little while. I wanted to show you a couple of things that we've improved recently in the rights management service. You can see here I've got Sarah Davis's mailbox open, and Sarah has a mail from Katie Jordan, which has a do not forward flag. So do not forward is one of the out-of-the-box information rights management policies, and it means I can't forward this email. It also means I can't print it out, I can't edit it, and I can really only view it. And one of the things we've added here is the ability to view this email directly inside of the Outlook web app. So Outlook can pass the file onto the Excel web app, which can go ahead and decrypt it and show it to me, although not right now. So as I'm starting to demo these things, I really want to show you guys these things running off the live service. I have certainly noticed the network connectivity in the conference is not perhaps what I'm used to. So some of these things have not been working for me here right now. If it doesn't work, I've got all these demos screenshotted on PowerPoint because I really want to show you what this looks like. So we can switch to that. But let's just pass over that one. I want to show you, you can assign retention policy here. This is part of Office 365. So retention policy means, hey, after this particular period of time, if you're following this policy, this email will go ahead and expire and we'll shift it over. It could be shifted into the archive or it could be deleted based on the retention policy there. In Outlook Web Access, I can also go ahead and send an email to Garth here. And all I have to do to set that do not forward permission is go in here and set this permissions. If I wanted to have a file that's encrypted, I just go and drag the file into OWA. And now when I send this email, it's going to encrypt this file before it sends it out on the wire and puts it in Garth's mailbox. And Garth will find he's not able to forward it, just like I'm not able to forward it as Katie here. All right, you can see the forward button is grayed out there. So continuing along here to take a look at information rights management, let's go and take a look at a SharePoint site. So the two places that we implement information rights management, one is in email, so you can protect attachments and emails that you send out, and the second is in SharePoint. So I have this SharePoint site here called Facilities, Contoso Facilities, and I've enabled information rights management on this SharePoint site, on the document library that's in this SharePoint site. So if we go and take a look at the document library here, you can see I've got a file here. It looks perfectly ordinary. The one change in how I know it's information rights managed protected is this preview that opens up just anytime you hover over the file is not able to show it. But if I go and click on the file here and it opens it in the Excel web app, sure enough, we can open the file. Excel's able to decrypt it there. And you can see the note here, require IRM for facilities documents and facilities documents. This is simply a description that I've put in when I created this rights management policy. So I want to show you how you set up rights management real quick. There are 3 things that you have to do to IRM enable a SharePoint library. These are not required for Outlook, but the top level thing you have to do here is we're going to go into library settings, and I'm in library settings here, and I'm going to go to the purple one, of course, information rights management here, and you check this box. So I check this box, and that's going to enable information rights management on this particular document library in SharePoint. That's all I have to do. What that actually does is the files are stored unencrypted in the document library, and this enables search to work, search indexing to work properly. when the document is downloaded or accessed in any way by a client, or by whether it be a web client or a rich client, the document is encrypted by the rights management service, actually the Windows Azure rights management service, because rights management service is part of Windows Server, before it is able to be downloaded. So when I tick that, that's what happens. Here's that name and description there that I set. I'm showing the options here of the different things you can say. Very useful option that you should use is this stop restricting access to the library after period. Typically, document libraries are project-oriented, and you know your project finishes in 6 months, so it's a good idea to turn that off. You can also do things like allow users to print, to edit. You can have the credentials verified over a certain number of days, which means offline access is okay, but only after a certain number of days there. So that's the easy one. The second one is I've actually got to go in and set up SharePoint. So I'll go into Admin SharePoint here. I've got to set up the SharePoint implementation, SharePoint Online, to do rights management service. And we do this just in the settings down here. And over here in this part of settings where it says information rights management, the default is do not use information rights management for this tenant, and you've got to click on this, this guy here. It's got this refresh IRM settings. That's the third thing I have to set up, which I go into the Office 365 admin, because when you configure rights management service on premise, you've got to do it in your SharePoint server. You've also got to do it in you've got to have a Windows Server role for rights management service. So let's go in here. Where have I got to? Service settings. And in service settings, I can go to rights management. And this gets me through to managing my rights management server that's associated with this tenant. And you can see this goes off to the active Windows Azure. So there you go. All you need to do is activate there. And this is effectively what I'm doing is I'm installing that rights management role on Windows Server. So there you go. There's 3 things you have to do to set up rights management. And we'll switch back here. One is in the SharePoint library. You've got to tell it which libraries you want to do. Second is you've got to enable SharePoint in the central admin there that I did to have rights management. And then you've got to turn on the rights management server. You don't have to go and install the server, but you've got to go and check the box there. All right, briefly we want to talk about user access. For user access to Office 365, we use Windows Azure Active Directory. And Windows Azure Active Directory is the cloud version of Active Directory. You can synchronize your local on-premise Active Directory with it. I gave a talk yesterday about Windows Azure Active Directory and identity in Office 365. We have a ton of authentication mechanisms and security mechanisms coming in Windows Azure Active Directory. One that's in preview right now is multi-factor authentication. But there's a lot of things that you can do to identify who are those users, make sure that they're synchronized between the cloud and on-premise, and work with those. So I want to talk about data loss prevention. Data loss prevention is another technology that we have that enables the tenant administrator to secure access to documents. Data loss prevention is thinking about the very simplest of ways that critical or confidential data is leaked or lost by an organization. And this is focusing particularly on that gap between policy and what users think that we talked about right at the start of the session. So if your users think it's okay to share spreadsheets that contain credit card numbers with external users, and they go ahead and do that, it's possible that email might be intercepted, it might be forwarded on, and suddenly you're responsible for leaking customer credit card numbers out to a third party, and there's all sorts of process that come into play, and bad things that happen. So data loss prevention is a technology that's part of Exchange Online, and it is implemented in 2 places in Exchange Online. It's implemented in the Exchange transport rules, which are customizable rules that run on the Exchange server when emails are being transported. So these transport rules will apply the data loss prevention policies, look at emails, look at the contents of emails, look at attachments, verify that those fall within the policy, and then send them out. And if they're not, it's going to issue a DNR back to the sender. The second place where this is implemented is in Outlook, Outlook Web Access and Outlook Client. where Outlook tooltips are used to essentially look at the same policies and give the user a heads up that something is awry before they get the DNR email back. So there's two places where this is implemented. Let's take a look. All right, so I am going to start here and I'm going to show the user experience of DLP, and then I'm going to switch over and I'm going to show how you configure it, what you can do as an admin. So I'm running my local Outlook here, and I'm just going to go and create a new email, and I'll drag in some customer data into that email, and we'll say who we're going to send that to. Send that to Sarah. And I'll take a quick look. Let's have a look. This is what is in this spreadsheet. So it's got credit card numbers over there on the side, and that's the concern here that we have. So this policy tip appears, and this is running inside of Outlook. Outlook does a request up to the Exchange server to figure out how to show this. Let's give it a subject. You can see that it's been highlighted yellow. If you have multiple attachments and one attachment fails the policy, that one that is failing the policy will be highlighted. You can see the details there. If I hit send, it says, hey, you're not allowed to send this because it violates policy, but you can override it. So it turns out if I'm sending to an internal user, this particular policy is set so that I can override. It says your action will be audited, and then I can go ahead and send it. So I have another policy in here. If I send to an external user, let's go and grab the same spreadsheet. We'll drag it in here. You can see how long it takes to go and find that policy tip. My send button is active until the policy tip comes up, and the mail will go out, not out. It will go to the Exchange Transport Rules, and I'll get a DNR back. Because the policy tip's come up now, it says you're not allowed to send this to an external user, and there's really nothing I can do about it. So it's impossible for me to send this mail at this point. I've got to go and cancel. If I'm really clever, I might think, oh, I can beat the policy tip. But Exchange Transport Rules cannot be beat. So don't bother trying. All right, so let's go in and take a look at what that's like to configure. So DLP is all about these two things, Exchange Transport Rules and these policy tips. All right, so let's sign into this tenant as admin. And the tenant comes up in the Office 365 Admin Center. And I'm just going to go into service settings again, and then DLP policies conveniently here in the middle. So in this DLP policies, this is where I set up all the DLP policies for an Office 365 tenant. And it shows me the DLP policies which are currently there. This is a list. There's only one item in there. It's this PCI-credit card. It says it's enforcing right now. Anytime you create a new DLP policy, it'll go into test mode initially. Test mode will let you do reporting. You can, of course, report on violations of data loss prevention policies. And then you will switch it into enforce when you're happy with the policy. You don't want to just arbitrarily block everyone's email in your organization for no reason. So it's a good idea to test these first. I can go ahead and edit this. And you can see the name of it there. If I click on the rules, you can see there's two rules here for this policy. And one is for external recipients and one's for internal recipients. These rules are all constructed in essentially the same way. If we get this rule to come up, you can see it's got a name, and then it's got apply this rule if. And then in a similar sort of way to Outlook mail rules that you configure in the client for your mail processing, you can take a look at attachments, the senders, the recipients, whether the mail is being sent or actually received, and what kind of information is in the message. So you can add different conditions, and then if those conditions are met, we're going to do this stuff. So we're going to notify the sender with a policy tip, and then we're going to generate an incident report, and in this case, we're going to send that incident report to a particular user in the organization, Dennis. So that's all we've got there. There's a few other things that you can configure there for those rules. And then I have a separate rule, which is essentially the same rule for internal users, but it actually allows the override. So the checkbox for allowing override is set in there as well. You could create different types of these rules. So you can add more rules to the policy, or you can create new policies. There's 3 types of these policies that you can create. The first one here, new DLP policy from template. We have 44 different templates that you can choose from. Import DLP policy is where you have created a DLP policy in the XML and you've set up the rules in XML there. You can load that up. And then you can create a new custom DLP policy where you configure that from scratch. If I just go in and show you real quick these different policies that you can select from. If we're creating it from a template, you can choose one of these existing policies that we have pre-created with various different types of information that is being matched. So for example, where is that credit card one that I had? It was called CC credit card something or other. Here it is, PCI data security. So this guy for credit card data is going to be specifically looking both in emails and in attachments for groups of 4 numbers which appear to be a credit card and also which match the credit card check information. So if you simply have a list of numbers that goes 000000000, we're not going to match that. We're only going to match it if it has the, you know how credit card numbers have a checksum right at the end according to their algorithm. So it's going to match those only. You can sort of understand why these policies take a moment to come up in Outlook, but they are intended primarily to be blocked in those exchange transport rules. So unfortunately, I don't have any here specific to New Zealand, but you can create those yourself and add those in. All right, yeah, the last thing I wanted to show here was in my Outlook, I have Dennis's email, and we should be able to go and see here from 5 minutes ago, we've got this email that has been forwarded to us containing information about the customer data. And so if I open this email, hi, here's the data. Here's the email that I overrode and sent to Sarah Davis. Remember, I wasn't able to send the email externally, so it hasn't logged that. All right. So a couple of great new technologies, RMS and DLP. So I wanted to talk also a little bit about compliance. We provide archiving and retention scenarios for Exchange Online mailboxes. In-place archive means that as an administrator or controlling data retention, you can configure certain users' mailboxes as being on hold, and their mail is kept in place. If the user deletes the mail, it does not appear any longer in their Outlook, but it is not in fact deleted. So if you put a user's mailbox on hold due to some either investigation or simply because it's your CEO of your organization and you want to be able to go back and find everything that's been communicated with the CEO and put your hand up and say, this is everything that's been communicated with our CEO, you might put a mailbox on hold, and this is seamless to the user, so they don't have to do anything special. I remember in the old days when your mailbox got put on hold, the delete button just stopped working, and it was very frustrating because you'd have to move mails around when you didn't want to show them in folders anymore. So in-place archive can allow you to run queries for legal reasons and other things later on. And so e-discovery becomes is a really powerful feature that's available in Exchange Online. I encourage you to take a look at that and see how that matches up with your compliance requirements. If any of you have tenants with Office 365, you'll know that we take great pains to reduce spam and prevent viruses from being emailed around. Microsoft has pretty well world-class virus and spam protection technology due to the many years of targeted attacks against Microsoft. So we apply all of this to Exchange Online. We use rules-based spam and virus scanning, such that the worst offenders of spam and viruses don't appear in your mailbox ever. And under a certain threshold, if we think, hey, it might be spam, but then again, it might not, we use the ratio such that those ones are going to appear in your junk folder, in your Office 365 tenant, and then if it's below another threshold, hey, it's just going to come up in your inbox. So what do we say? 98% of all inbound spam. Certainly, some still get through, but that's just the joys of mail that does not cost money to send. All right, so the third section, let's see, I don't have a lot of time to talk on this third section, only about 5 minutes left, is talking about our independent verification and compliance. So why do we get independently verified? Customers want to know that Microsoft is looking after their data and doing the right things to make sure that the servers will continue to run. And Microsoft does not permit customers to do audits on our service, and we also do not permit tours of our data centers for audit purposes. And the reason that we talk about, and the reason we don't do this is we would have lots of customers requesting this, and the costs associated with running these things would be prohibitive. So what we actually do is we engage third-party independent auditors to come in and look at our systems. So we do have people from outside looking at Microsoft, how we implement policies and such, and we provide this information about these audits to customers who are either working through the sales process or who are already signed up. Interesting that we do not actually provide these reports publicly. They're not shared broadly. I don't actually know why. Maybe, I don't know. So certifications, as I mentioned right at the start of the talk, we're in an environment where government regulation is approaching cloud services, and Microsoft is working hard to achieve different government regulation. We really started off a lot of these with the ISO 27001 certification, which is the International Standards Organization, and a lot of countries have adopted that standard with alternate numbers for in-country standards, or that standard with some minor changes. So we've worked to be tested and compliant with those other countries as well. We've recently got into some law enforcement and government standards and regulations, primarily in the United States, which has seen just an enormous uptake from different local law enforcement and government organizations of Office 365, so it's very exciting to see that. We have a number of these still coming up, and we have a team that basically works on these continuously, working with different parts of the organization, the Office 365 development organization, to improve our systems where necessary and verify and audit our systems otherwise to make sure that we're adhering to those and continuing to push forward there. We publish on the Office 365 Trust Center details about where our data centers are located. For New Zealand, those data centers are in Singapore and Hong Kong. Depending on your tenant, you will either have primary in Singapore, backup in Hong Kong, or vice versa. And that is for the Exchange servers and SharePoint servers. For Link Online, the servers are in the United States. Link Online does not store a lot of data about users, so we don't have that in the local APAC data center. Also for Active Directory, our primary Active Directory storage is in Dublin. I tell you this not to say, hey, it's a long way away, but to say that is where our primary data storage is. Obviously, we have DCs in all of our data centers where our servers are using it, so that identity data is replicated into the APAC data centers for customers down here. So this is what we share. We share this for all the different regions that we are at. We actually share a lot more information about transparency of what we do with data and different aspects of privacy and security up on the Trust Center that we call the Trust Center. It's at this URL, trust.office365.com. And I'd love for you to go and take a look at what we've got up there. We've got some links to what GFS, that organization, does to support Office 365 and a few other things. Got a couple of other URLs you might want to check out. I know Ali and Jeff were here just a bit earlier talking about Fast Track. So this is my summary. So I want to thank you for being with me this morning and listening to me talk about security. Just as a reminder, I covered, well, 4 areas really. I had sort of an overview, an introduction or a background to security in Office 365. And then I talked about the built-in security, what we do to ensure our servers are secure. Then I talked about some customer controls. I showed demos of information rights management and data loss prevention, and showed a few other features that we have there. And then I talked about the third-party verification and certification, which is really the proof and what we do to try and give evidence that we are doing the right thing. Security, at the end of the day, is what you have as a policy in your organization, and this policy typically embodies the risk that you're willing to take on and any mitigation that you want to do to address that risk. So whatever that risk profile is that you have in your organization and that policy that you have as regards to that, we want to work to make sure that we can address those items in that policy, and we do that for all of our customers in Office 365. So clearly a very important aspect of the service that we run for Office 365. Security and data privacy is obviously critical to customers, and we take it very seriously. And with that, I'm going to show you the obligatory slides. You can win stuff, and you can check out our related content. Please do an eval. I gather you can win stuff for doing that. Please either send me email or contact me on Twitter. I have my details at the start of the deck. Love to hear from you and your experiences in security and also identity in Office 365. For those of you who want to stay and ask questions, I have a few gifts to give away for questions. But otherwise, how are we doing? Thank you very much. I'm right on time. Thank you.